My name is Ingelore. Honigstein. My maiden name was Hertz. My mother's name was Amelie. Her last name was Hamburger. My father's name was Berthold Hertz. And we were from Kuppenheim. This is near Baden-Baden. I was born in Rastatt, October 27th, 1924. My mother was from that town, and when my parents married, my father was working at a hardware store. But we were all Jewish. We were German Jews. I remember Hanukkah. We couldn't afford to buy a fancy silver menorah when I was growing up. All we had was a very plain wooden menorah, a long strip of wood with all the individual candle holders for the 7 days. Each member of the family would set theirs up with the ends touching each other. There was a small temple nearby that we attended. I have no siblings. I am an only child. When my mother was pregnant with me, she contracted German measles. But the cause of my deafness they listed as unknown. They don't really know if I was born deaf or not. My mother never really came to accept that I was deaf. My Aunt Cora, however, told my mother that she really needed to take me to a specialist. She felt that it was important that they make sure they could find out what was wrong with me. And the doctor did indeed confirm that I was deaf. So I couldn't speak, I couldn't yell or scream, I couldn't make any sounds at all. I was lonesome. I lived in a very small town. My mother didn't have any more children because of me. She said that I was equal actually to her having 10 children because I was such a wild girl growing up. I was a tomboy. I would jump over brooks with all the boys. Whatever the boys were doing, I had to follow and do exactly what they were doing. Well, my parents had to send me to a special teacher and put me into foster care with foster parents who keep me in their home. This was in the town of Karlsruhe, Baden. So he functioned as my speech teacher and speech therapist. He worked on my voice box, which they said was paralyzed, and that was the reason I wasn't able to talk. I couldn't say A or B or anything with voice behind it. My teacher hit my back very hard, and I let out a scream, "Ah!" And he said, "Yes, that is the letter A, ah." It's as if something in my mind woke up when that happened. I wanted to learn more. For the letter B, he took a strip of paper and put it in front of my mouth and encouraged me to blow on it and produce the letter B to move the paper. First, I didn't do it strongly enough. Then he encouraged me, and I was able to produce a B. Well, one letter led to another, and over the course of time, I was finally able to produce letters and words. The process took about 2 or 3 years. I can't remember exactly. Finally, I was able to speak in sentences pretty well after a couple of years. But I learned nothing educationally during this time. What words meant were not taught to me at all. All the energy was put into helping me with vocal production. I did see Goebbels, the short one, was sitting in a car, and behind him was Himmler. They were sitting in a car together. Yeah, Himmler had the glasses. Everyone was in a parade formation, saying Sieg Heil, and making the salute. I had to follow with the crowd, of course, and do the salute as well as they passed by. And that's all. That was the only people in that particular echelon that I saw. People were going back and forth. Well, in my hometown, I was the only one who was deaf. So in a small town, everybody knew me. Everybody knew I was Jewish. Everybody knew my father had a hardware business. We were known all over the small town in which we lived. So I was spit on. Stones were thrown at me. I just had to keep my cool. I couldn't fight back. I had to keep my cool and take the blows as they came. Jews weren't allowed to sit on the park benches. Nobody was allowed to go into museums. Jewish people weren't allowed to go into the movies. And I did see the signs prohibiting these activities. I saw a lot of Nazis, a lot of uniforms. There were brown uniforms, and also there was a contingent of Nazis that were the SS who wore black uniforms. They were terrifying. They were the ones who would torture people, those in the black uniforms. There were other colors, brown and orange, that I saw, but yes, there were people in uniform all around. I was sent to Heidelberg School for the Deaf. And once I entered that environment, I was able to learn much more. There were pictures up on the walls with words written underneath them, such as car, a picture of a car with the word car underneath it. So I was able to put the ideas, the concept, the picture, and the word together, and I was able to learn more. Yes, it was mixed. However, I was the only Jew on the premises at the time. I was there from the ages of 10 till somewhere between 13 and 14. At that time, I was curious about the behavior of my classmates. They began spitting on me and pulling my hair. And I wondered why they were doing this to me. Why were they hurting me? I'd never done anything against them. I was always nice to them. So why were they torturing me? No one would give me an answer. I went to the director of the school to ask him. His name was Dr. Singer. I said, "Can you tell me why they're pulling my hair when I'm always so nice to my classmates?" Dr. Singer told me, "You better just go home." They brought all my clothes and all my possessions down, and they were going to send me home. But I said I haven't finished school yet. Sorry, he said. You have to go home. I was shocked. I couldn't understand why this would be happening to me. The supervisor took me to the train station, and I was supposed to leave to go to my hometown of Kuppenheim. I got off the train when I arrived in the town, and there was nobody there to greet me. Nobody picked me up at the station. I waited and waited. Finally, I just lugged all my baggage behind me and pulled it all the way to my house. I lived in a beautiful big villa. And the first thing I saw was that all the doors and windows had been shuttered and barricaded with planks of wood. I went back to the backyard, and I pounded on the back door and yelled for my mama. She finally opened the door and took me in. And she said, "Why did you come home?" I told her about everything that had happened at the school. And then I thought to ask her, "Where's Papa?" She said that my father had been taken away to Dachau, the concentration camp. This was located near Munich. My father had been in Dachau concentration camp in 1938, in November. That was just around the same time as Kristallnacht occurred. Temples, stores, everything Jewish owned was closed. Nazis put swastikas all over the storefronts. Everything was closed down. They stole everything, all the valuable things from Jewish people and Jewish merchants. That's when my father was taken to Dachau. How he escaped from Dachau is a mystery to me. I don't know if he bribed someone. I still wonder about why my father obtained his freedom from Dachau. We suspect it's because the Nazis needed him to help them procure materials from wholesalers and distributors, the same people that he got the products for his hardware store from. They wanted to know where he got steel and iron and other materials that they needed. We think that's how. He had a black and white uniform on with a hat, a striped hat also, from Dachau. He had a Star of David on the side of his uniform. He came home and took all these prison clothes off, and we found that his head had been shaven. So after that, of course, he wore regular clothes. Somebody took over the store without paying, without buying it. The store was just confiscated. Even my house was confiscated by the mayor of the city where we lived. The mayor moved into our beautiful house. They just took it over. Later on, my Aunt Cora, who had been a teacher for quite a while but was now unemployed, found a school for the deaf for me. It was another school, a Jewish school, that was located in Berlin. So I was taken to the train station. Along the train route, we had to stop halfway at Barmstadt. At that time, trains had to stop before 8 o'clock at night. So the next day, I was able to continue my journey all the way to Berlin. I entered the school and saw very few children who were in attendance, and there were only 2 teachers. The director, Dr. Khan, had taken over running the school. There had been a previous director, but he had left to take many of the children out of the country to escape to London. I learned a little bit while I was there, a little bit of Hebrew, but not much. The woman caretaker knew of a rich family nearby. They were in Potsdam Platz, and lived in a very wealthy house there. They would be willing to teach me how to cook and clean the house, and also how to sew and darn socks. So it was arranged that I would take a streetcar there every day, and after school I would work for this family. I always left every evening at 6:30. It always took over half an hour just to get there and back. One day the streetcar was running late, very late. And I wasn't supposed to get back to my school after 8 in the evening. I walked very quietly up the street. Two Nazi youth military students from the academy nearby came up behind me. They grabbed hold of me and took me to their room. And there they raped me repeatedly. The first one told me exactly what he wanted me to do, and that I had to do everything he wanted. And then the second one did the same. I screamed, and they clasped their hands over my mouth and told me not to make any noise. I suffered horribly. I had so much blood all over my legs trickling down. It was terrible. I couldn't even walk. It was terrible, horrible pain I was experiencing. That happened when I was already 15 years old. It was just at the beginning of December. I went back to the school, but they wouldn't open the door for me. They refused. I pounded and pounded, and I said, "It's Ingelore. Let me in. Please open the door." All the lights were out, and the building was dark. Finally, the door opened, and I was allowed to come in. The door closed behind me, and the caretaker saw all the blood all over me. She took care of me and cleaned me up. And she said, "What happened to you?" I explained everything to her and said, "I don't want to go back to that house. I don't want to go back to that job again." When I was healed, it was time for Christmas vacation, so I took a train back home. I was going to stay there for a while and then come back to school the same way. I got to my house and my mother looked at me, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. I wasn't smiling. I'd become very serious. It's as if I'd aged and become older. But my mother never knew what had happened to me. I was ashamed to tell her. I was scared to tell anybody else. I told no one what had happened. I had a great uncle who was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. He is the one of the family that helped everyone else get out of Germany. My parents could have left in 1937, but I was not able to go with them if they'd made the choice to go. The priority wasn't high enough for me to be given a visa because I was deaf, and so that's what happened, and we were the last to leave. Later on, my parents received a letter from the American consulate. This was located in Stuttgart. Stuttgart is located in the south of Baden-Baden. We went to the consulate, and my parents wanted to be with me when I went into the office. But the person who was in charge of the consulate office wouldn't allow them to accompany me. He shooed them away, and I had to go in alone into this office with him. I said I'd be so very, very proud to be an American. I want to go to school. I want to learn to speak English. I want to learn some sort of vocational trade. I haven't been able to finish school. He tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Turn around. I want to give you a hearing test." I was terrified. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I thought, all right, I'll just try my best. I could hear some sounds, but I was never able to discern words. I turned around, and somehow, God was with me that day. What happened was, on the wall that I was facing was a beautiful picture with a glass pane over it. And this picture reflected the light as if it were a mirror. I could actually look at the reflection in this picture, and I was able to lip read what the man behind me was saying. I tried so hard to catch every word that he uttered. I turned to him and I acted dumb, like I hadn't been able to use this reflection, and I tried to say, please, please, don't do this to me. Let me be an American. He said, just one more word. I want you to just hear one more word. So quietly, I tried to control myself as I looked back into that picture again. And I turned to him and I said, I believe you said something, and then I told him the word I thought he'd said. And then he didn't even say anything more to me. He became very businesslike, and he wrote something on a paper, and then I had to sign. I don't even know what I was signing to. When we were done, he took me out to see my parents. My parents had been waiting for me and wondering what had happened. And they asked me, did something get written down? And I said, yes. And they said, fantastic, you've received your visa. You've got a passport now. You got it. Really? I had no idea what was going on, but we were overjoyed. We took the train back to our hometown once more. And now we just had a window of opportunity of 24 hours to get out. We couldn't bring anything with us. All I had was my backpack, and my mother had a couple of suitcases. We took the train to the border of Germany and Holland. I've forgotten the name of that border town. We had to undergo an inspection when we reached the border. They asked me if I had any money, and I said yes, I did. I took it out to show them, and they said that I had to leave the money right there. I said, I have no money. I have to go to school. I won't have money for anything. But it didn't matter. They didn't say one word to me. They just indicated I had to leave my money on the table, and that was that. I had one gold bracelet that I had hidden in the shoulder pads of my jacket. I had this wonderful jacket with very big boxy shoulder pads, and I had carefully placed it within the padding. They just didn't seem to have thought of it that day. So I was able to bring this bracelet with me. We entered Holland and went to the town of Rotterdam. My great-uncle picked us up at the train station and took us to the hotel. Before we went in, I saw the dining room, and there was this huge bowl of fruit. Wow! I had never seen so many fruits in one place before. I'd never seen a banana. And I'd never seen oranges either. Other fruits I'd had experience with, but not bananas and oranges. Anyway, we went to our bedroom. My parents had one bed to themselves and I had the other, and we immediately fell asleep. We were so tired because of the stressful situation we'd been in during the day. My mother was the worst off of the three of us. My father was doing all right. We fell asleep, and my uncle was still downstairs waiting for us to come down and eat with him. He was waiting in the dining room, and we never showed up. Finally, he went upstairs and knocked on our door, found us asleep, and he roused us to bring us down to the dining room. There was so much food in that dining room, all different kinds of cold cuts, several different sorts of cheeses, huge rounds of cornbread, which I just love. I immediately concocted myself a huge sandwich, and I ate it and was so full I couldn't eat any more. My stomach had shrunken so badly by this time. Everything at that time was limited in Germany. The food you could get wasn't very good quality. We had to use, what are they called? Ration cards, ration books. There were stamps in them, and you would have a stamp that was good to exchange for meat, another stamp that was good for milk, and the quantities were severely limited as to how much you were able to get. And what you could get was a terrible grade of meat, sometimes just the bones. You would get a bone with just a little bit of meat left clinging to it. Other people had the better cuts of meat, but the Jews got the worst of it. We'd get soup bones with barely any meat on them anymore, instead of something that was a higher cut. I remember that any German ID card that had the label Juden affixed to it, indicating that you were Jewish, would have to have a certain middle name for males or females. Since I was a woman, I was Ingelore Sarah. All girls had to have the middle name of Sarah. And all males had to have the middle name of Israel. We stayed for 2 days. And then my uncle took us to look at the ship. The ship was called the Volendam No. 1. There was actually a series of these ships. There was the Volendam No. 2 and 3, but we were on Volendam 1. All the Jewish people got on to the boat and found their separate bunks. The men had separate quarters from the women. So my father was in a different area of the boat than my mother and I were. I went upstairs to the dining room to look around. I wanted to know where everything was. We took a little tour of the boat. And then we left to cross the English Channel. It was a terrible crossing because the weather was awful. There was a bad storm. and the waves were rolling back and forth. Over the edge of the ship I could see these huge round mines bobbing on the waves. They were huge, with these spiky configurations coming out of the sides of them, and the waves would toss these mines around back and forth. I prayed that they wouldn't hit the boat. All of the passengers were required to wear life jackets. We had to. It was terrifying. Yeah, it might seem funny, but I stood on the side of the boat and I tried to blow the mines away from the ship. I just blew as hard as I could, hoping that I could blow them away. Everybody else went downstairs, but I stood at the deck and watched these mines. Finally, I went downstairs too. 24 hours passed, and then an announcement came over the speakers that we could take our life jackets off. But I wouldn't. I was too afraid to take mine off. Finally, everything quieted down. It took 10 days to make the crossing. On the 10th day, I woke up and went outside to get some fresh air, and I saw these lights twinkling on the horizon and thought, what is that? First I thought it was some stars, but there was something about it that didn't quite look like a star. I asked a sailor who was standing nearby, what are those lights? Is it America, perhaps? And he said, yes, that's America. I ran downstairs as fast as I could and got my mother to get up. I said, get dressed, come on. We're approaching America now. My mother and everybody else went up onto the deck to look at the shoreline. Everybody stood as we got closer and closer, and we passed the Statue of Liberty. I had seen pictures of it, and I'd heard of the Statue of Liberty, and I knew that she represented freedom. I turned to look at all the other passengers on the deck, and every single person was weeping. We wept for 3 things at the same time. We wept from joy that we were finally free. We wept because of the homes we left behind. And we wept with worry at the possibility of not being able to find jobs. We got to the U.S. on February 22nd, 1940, Washington's birthday. Now the ship docked, and my mother started to disembark from the ship. But somebody pushed me back and separated me from my parents. I said, my mother's going down there. But they kept me back because I was deaf. I started crying. I cried so hard they thought I had the chicken pox because I had developed hives all over my face. I was a very heavy crier. I gave up after a while and sat down on the floor. I cried so hard I cried myself to sleep. And as I slept, these mottling red blotches on my face went away. Somebody noticed that it had gone away and realized I wasn't sick, which was good because they would have sent me to Ellis Island. But once they ascertained that I was fine, they let me get off the boat, and I could go to my new home in America. Now on my passport it indicated that I was deaf, so people knew that already. Everybody on the boat got sick on the way over. Everyone. They were sick because of many different reasons. Stress, worry. I would go into the dining room, and there wouldn't be one soul in there eating dinner. I asked a sailor, where is everybody? There's nobody here. I'm the only one coming to eat. He said, well, come with me. You can join us sailors over in the sailors' mess hall. And that was really fun. I enjoyed that quite a bit. But you know what? Something came as a big surprise to me that I forgot to tell you before. I was later told something that was quite shocking. This boat turned around after it let us off in New York and went back to Holland. And on the way back to Holland, it was sunk. Well, evidently, it hit a mine. We went to my cousin's house. They said that we could stay there until we found jobs. They took me to the HIAS. And this is an organization that was for people to find employment. You would fill out applications, and they would try to find a place for you. As for me, they helped me find the Lexington School for the Deaf. I had a room to sleep in, I had food, everything provided for me there. I was 15 at the time. It was great. And then time went on, and my mother procured a job. She became a chambermaid. She was working at a place on Park Avenue. And my father became a gardener at Mount Vernon. I would go home on the weekends, and all my family would be working. I'd be left alone, with nothing much to do. I would just look out at the street. I saw that across the street there was a Dr. Vogel. His sign was hanging out the window. He was a middle-aged gentleman of about 55, 65, somewhere in there. I approached him one day and said, "Do you speak German?" He ushered me into his office. I said, "I have not had my period for the longest time. Now, I got my period when I was 10.5 years old. I got my period, and I thought that I'd done something bad because my pants were dirty. So I washed them and changed my underwear to something fresh. But again, they became soiled. I washed them again. Well, the third time this happened, I was afraid that I would get beaten because my pants kept getting dirty. I told my mother, and then she hit me on the cheek and went to the drugstore. Well, it's a Jewish custom. It's traditional. It's the Jewish way. It's sort of like saying good luck. But my mother didn't explain anything to me. She didn't explain anything about what this meant. I went to my grandmother and asked her what it was all about. She said, "Sit down. You're a big girl now. No more playing with the boys. You can't be a tomboy anymore. You can't climb mountains. You can't jump over brooks. No more. You have to be a lady now. You're not a girl." And I thought, oh, that doesn't sound like any fun at all. That won't be any fun. I have to be a lady. But that's what happened and how I found out. So anyway, I had gone to this doctor and explained that I'd had no period for quite a while and that I seemed to be gaining weight. He gave me a urine test. At that time, they called it a rabbit test. This was years and years ago. The doctor found out that I was pregnant. And I said, "Pregnant? What do you mean, a baby? I have a baby in there?" I was so surprised. Where'd it come from? Where'd this baby come from? How did it get there? He said, "Have you been with a man? Was a man in you? That's what gave you the baby." Really? All that bleeding and that thing that happened to me? And I told him, and he said, "Yes." But I didn't know. I had no idea. I told the doctor everything. And I told him I was so afraid to tell my parents because if they knew, I was terrified that my father would beat me or punish me in some kind of way. The doctor said, "Don't worry about it. I'll get hold of your mother after work." And we lived right across the street, of course. "I'll talk to your mother after work, and I'll tell her." I said, "I want to get rid of this baby." Now, I didn't know the word abortion at the time. I said, "Get this out of me. I want this out. I don't want this baby." I knew that it would always haunt me as this pregnancy progressed, that this had come to pass because of what the Nazis had done to me, that they had been so cruel to me, and I didn't want this reminder, a baby living and constantly reminding me of what had happened. I would rather have taken poison. I would rather have died. If this baby had lived, I would poison myself if I couldn't obtain an abortion. I did not want to see this baby brought into the world and grow up. However, abortions weren't legal without a parent's consent. They had to sign a form giving permission. The doctor explained that they were going to have to sign this. I also didn't have any insurance or any sort of sick benefits or anything, so I didn't know how I would pay him. Dr. Vogel's wife was in another room, and Dr. Vogel told my parents what happened to me. He told them not to hit me, that that would not be permitted, that it wouldn't be right after what your daughter's gone through. You need to support her. Your daughter's terrified that you're going to beat her, and that that isn't right. When my father found out, he cried, and then he signed the permission slip, and then I was able to get the abortion. He performed the abortion in his office, which was located in his home. It was private. His wife acted in the capacity of a nurse and helped out, and everything was boiled and sterilized, clean as it could be. And they went ahead and aborted the baby. How many months along were you? Patty asked. 2 months. I was 2 months pregnant at the time. I didn't want to know if it was a boy or a girl. I didn't care. After the abortion, I stayed in bed for 2 weeks, recuperating and resting. The nurse visited me fairly frequently. My parents asked, how much do I have to pay you? Should I pay you weekly or once a month? And the nurse said, no, this is my gift to you. Because I feel so terrible. I feel so sorry for her, for your daughter. Well, in Heidelberg, Germany, I had a good friend. I knew her and I knew her family. Her father was a shoemaker. I met my husband at my friend's house years before I married him. This was in the town of Weinheim. My soon-to-be husband would bring samples of materials so that the shoemaker would decide what sort of materials they wanted to use in their wares. I was visiting one time, and I was a little girl of about 13 or so. He saw me and pinched my cheek and pinched my ear and patted me on the head and was very sweet to me. We were 15 years apart in age. Then I came to America and one time was visiting my cousin at her home. And this same gentleman walked in the door. I said, you look so familiar to me. I've met you somewhere before. Let's see now. You're deaf? Oh, wait, I remember you. You kind of pinched my nose and my cheek and patted me on the head one time way back when. And he said, oh, I remember you. You Ingelore? And I said, yes. Well, what did you come here for today? He said, I've come to pick up your cousin, whose name was Edith. And Edith was hearing. They'd known each other because they were from the same hometown in Germany. A lot of people from the same area in Germany were living in this one particular neighborhood. Anyway, he'd come to take Edith out on a date. I said, what are you going to be doing this afternoon on this date? Well, we're going to the theater. The theater? I said, oh, it's going to be singing, and you can't even hear it. What are you going to go with her for? I don't think she's the one for you. I think it'd be better if you and I go out on a date. Don't you think I'd be better for you? I was 16 at the time, and he was, well, 15 years older. Maybe it was less than 15 years older. Anyway, we attended sports events together. We went to movies with captions. They were what are they called? Newsreels. Newsreels. They had the captions across the bottom telling you what was going on. We saw lots of those. We attended those in Times Square in New York City. So we saw each other more and more. We went to the beach together. And as time went on, we felt more and more as if we were falling in love. After a while, I told my father that I was dating him. And there was this one day I said, I'm going on this date with Herb. He said, well, you have to polish my shoes first before you go out on this date. I said, I will. I'll polish your shoes. I'll do it tomorrow morning. We were talking about Saturday. I said, I will polish them Sunday morning. I'll make sure I do it first thing tomorrow morning. I promise I will tomorrow. He was so angry at me that he hit me really hard on my back. I felt the force of that blow go all the way through, right through my sternum. I couldn't even yell. I couldn't even breathe. He hit me so hard. It went right through me. I went into my bedroom and locked the door. Herb was outside waiting and waiting for me to show up for our date. He came upstairs and I heard his knock on the door, but I refused to answer. The next morning, I polished my father's shoes for him. And Herb later said, what happened? And I said, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me. The following Sunday, Herb came again to see me and wanted to go out. We went out that afternoon to the park. He tried to put his arm around me. I said, please don't touch my back. It hurts too much. And I think at that time I was 17 or 18 years old, somewhere around there. And he said, why not touch your back? What's going on? And I said, it just hurts too much. Herb said, I want to see what's up with your back. I said, no, it's nothing. Please let me see, he insisted. And then he pulled my garment away from my back and looked down, and was shocked to find that my entire back was black and blue from the blow my father had given me. He said, why are you black and blue? What happened? Now, I didn't know what it looked like. I couldn't see behind me. I had no idea. And he said, what happened? And I explained that my father hit me. Then he was in a big hurry to marry me, just to get me away from my father. That's the reason we got married. Once he saw what had happened on my back from my father hitting me so hard, he wanted to get me away. Now, he had suspected this had gone on, Herb did, and he'd been making preparations. We were married June 10th, 1944. Herbert Stiefel. Herbert was in Germany, too. He was from Weinheim. He was president of a Jewish deaf club that was located in Frankfurt on Main. Was on Main. He sent a flyer to all of the deaf Jewish people, telling them to come to a very important meeting. And he wanted to make an incredibly important announcement to them this one particular time. He had a best friend named Fritz Herbst. This was his best friend. Very tight pals. Fritz wasn't Jewish, but Fritz had warned Herbert He said, "You must leave Germany immediately. You've got to get out as soon as possible." He said, "I've heard plans, I've heard things that are going on, and you've got to get out of here. Any friends or relatives you have in America or England or Israel, please get hold of them and leave now." Herb made this announcement to all of the deaf people who were members of the Deaf Club. They said, "Why? What about our jobs? What about our money, our savings?" Herb said, "I have the same problems. In America, we can get money, we can get jobs, but we need to leave. Germany is no more for us." This is what he announced to all the members of the Deaf Club. And then he said, "Someday, all of us here will see each other again." And that was the last words that he announced to the Deaf Club of which he was the president. Years later, I was married to Herbert, and I bore 2 beautiful sons. The older one's name is Frank, and my second son is Lester, who was born 4 years later. We raised our sons together, and Herbert became very sick. He had a growth in his throat removed. Then the doctor found that he had a difficulty with his bone marrow and that cancer was growing there. The cancer grew in his body like a tree. His back became hunched over, and the front of his body protruded. A growth actually burst through the skin and grew outside his body. They had to cover it with a patch. Growths of cancer came out everywhere, on his hips, his legs, just like a tree. He eventually died from cancer. My husband was looking for a job, and he heard somewhere that there was someone who specialized in designs for custom-made suits. Perhaps somebody had unusual measurements and needed something very specifically tailored for them. It was very, very difficult to measure for people, and especially if the material was plaid. It was hard to match it up. He became foreman at this business because he was very, very good at it. One day, he was commissioned to make a uniform for General Eisenhower. And also, he was asked to create a uniform for General Patton. He was also commissioned to make a suit for Clark Gable. Wow. So he got to measure Clark Gable. And then one of the workers said, "Do you know him? Do you know who this is?" He said, "Nope, never seen this man in my life." Clark Gable even wrote his name down. Somebody said, "This is a movie star." He said, "No, I still haven't heard of him." So he brought it home and showed me. And I said, "You've got to go get the autograph." He came home from work and asked me if I knew who this was. And I said, "Yes, of course. We saw the movie, don't you remember? Gone with the Wind. We just saw it like a couple of days ago. You don't remember this?" He said, "Well, he'll be coming back for a fitting sometime soon." And I said, "Great, if he comes back, you've got to tell me so I can come meet him." But he never came back. He received a tragic phone call. The suit was ready, but he'd left and gone to England to join the Air Force. He had just lost his wife in an airplane crash. Her name was Carol Lombard? Yes, her plane crashed. So then he joined the Air Force. And that's what happened. And that was like in the 40s, 41, 42, while the war was going on, I believe. Something like that. I'm not sure of the timing. Remember, I was married in 1944, so it had to have happened after that time. 45, 46 maybe. I don't know exactly what year it was. Also, General Nimitz, that was a naval admiral. I believe there were ships named after him. That was a ship that was sunk. He was on a raft that he was stuck on for a few days before he was actually rescued. He'd lost a lot of weight, become very thin while he was waiting to be rescued. But anyway, my husband made a uniform for General Nimitz as well. We always called on my son Frank to come on Saturdays and make phone calls and help out with customers. But Frank didn't want to come to the store. He didn't want to miss out on his playtime and being with his friends. He was very young at the time. I'd say maybe 10 or 11, somewhere around there. 25 years we were married. He died, and later on, I married for the second time. My second husband's name was Jonas Lipkin. We were married a very short time, just 4 years. He's the one who made me learn how to drive in New York City. He made me learn how to drive, and he brought me to Florida. We lived in Florida together. He died in his sleep. We'd only been married 4 years. 1 year later, I met Paul Honigstein and married him. Altogether, 29 years. He was 96 years old when he died. He was very, very sick. He had cancer also. He had 5 bypasses. 3 were down below his ribcage on the left side, and then he had to have one of his carotid artery on the side of his neck on the right side. Then he experienced an aneurysm down in the lower part of his body, an aneurysm. He also fell at home and broke his hip, so he had to receive a hip replacement surgery. And then 3 weeks after that, he fell again, and he smashed the nerves on the side of his leg. And one thing led to another. He also had very narrow valves in his heart. He just died 5 months ago. May God let him rest in peace. We went to Israel together, to Tel Aviv. There was a large deaf group from the Helen Keller Society there. One woman came up and asked me where I was from. I said I'm from New York, but then I'd moved to Florida. She said, "What's your name?" I told her my full name, and I used Stiefel as my last name, Ingelore Stiefel. She said, "Herbert Stiefel?" I said, "Yes, that's my husband." She said, you know Herbert Stiefel?" I said, "Yes, that was my husband." "Your husband?" She hugged me, and she started kissing me all up and down my arms and all over my face, and I had no idea why. She said, "I'll never forget, Herbert was president of the Jewish Club in Germany, and he was the one who warned all of us about getting out of Germany. And the last words he said to us is that we'll all see each other someday, somewhere, again. And she was the one to see me and remind me and tell me of the last words that Herbert had said to them. And I'll never forget that. I wanted to see my old house to see if it was still standing or not. I wanted to see what kind of condition it was in. It changed a little bit, of course, on the outside, and then out back there were some new cars sitting in the garage. I had the nerve to knock on the door to ask if I could go in. A little girl came to the door, and I asked, "Is your grandma here or your mommy? I'd like to see them, please." Her grandmother came to see me at the door, and I told her, "This house belonged to my father, Bertold Hertz." She became extremely red in the face. It was my father's house. I asked if it would be permissible for me to come into the house and take a look around, and she ushered me in. The dining room had a beautiful chandelier that was still there. It was still there, exactly the same. A lot of things had been stolen. Fur coats and silver, jewelry, beautiful things that I recall from that house were gone. But I saw some things that were still there, and I became very emotional, and I had to leave. I just took my leave without saying a word of goodbye. I just left the house, got out as fast as I could. I told Paul about that, and he just couldn't even believe it. And that's what happened. My Aunt Cora got to America in 1940. I believe it was 41 or 42. I don't remember. She came through New York one time and stopped by my home saying that she was on her way to Germany. She wanted to see her grandparents' graves and what had happened to the cemetery there. She went to the town of Rimbach, where they were buried. She just wanted to see what happened to this one particular cemetery there in the town. I told my aunt that it looked awful and that all the stones were toppled. She'd gone to the mayor of the town and complained. "This is a disgrace. The grass needs to be mowed and the stones need to be cleaned up and set up to rights again. Everything needs to be cleaned up." After a while, I came again to see what the cemetery looked like, because at this point it was about 87 or 86, somewhere around then. I went to see the cemetery for myself, and the grass was overgrown yet again. The stones were still toppled, and nobody had done a thing to right them. I looked for my husband's family and great-great-grandparents, and I wasn't even able to locate the stones. My husband was trying to find them, becoming very emotional, and I finally stopped him and said, "Let's just give up." I spoke for the first time about this in Washington, D.C. It was a deaf Jewish convention. I was on a panel where people were telling their stories about what had happened to them. They were all survivors. I was listening to everybody, and Ruth Stern was sitting next to me and poked me in my side and said, "Get up. You tell your story. Tell them what happened to you, please." I said, "No, no, no." She said, "Well, everybody's got something similar. Tell your story, too." She finally got up and pointed at me so that everybody would look at me. And she made me get up. So, of course, I had to stand, and all eyes were upon me. So I had to stand in the middle of this forum, and I didn't even know where to begin. I told them my name. I told them what happened to me. And as I told the story and as I kept going on and on, it was just a torrent of information. And I looked in the audience, everyone was crying. Everyone was crying as they looked at me. And after that, I felt so much better. I felt like I'd finally gotten it off my chest. Somehow a weight had been lifted off of me. I felt so much lighter. And I have to give thanks to Ruth for that.